Give everyone a chance to get back from lunch.
Mailing is following the things.
I said, oh, I should do this.
At this point, I feel like a lot of the things obviously are just like echoing stuff.
Oh, exactly. Exactly.
You're doing, that's my Carlos thing.
Like, wait, what, you're gonna talk about the questions while we're trying to solve for?
It's okay. If you just put it in there instead of this.
You'll probably or something else flip it up and down.
All right, so why don't we kick it off? I am Jessica Frank, A2J Author's project manager, and I am mostly here to introduce my panelist presentation here on how the Kentucky courts are fighting the access to justice crisis with the help of law students. So this is Scott Emery, the project manager of the Information and Technology Services for the Kentucky Administrative Offices of the Court, and I will let Scott take it over. So Scott, go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad I got the after lunch crowd. I know that people are generally more content after lunch. So, pardon me, my phone decided to ring right then. Yeah, so I'm here to talk today a little bit about a journey that Kentucky has been taking over the past couple of years. And I've got a little PowerPoint presentation. I know how much everyone loves those, but it'll help keep me on track because I've got a lot that I can tell you has gone on in the past couple of years. So are you guys seeing my screen okay?
We don't see it.
Give it just a second. It may take a moment.
Do you have to give him the ability to share screen?
I already did.
Okay.
Is he authorized to share screen?
I did, yeah.
Still not seeing it, huh?
Yep.
Let's try this again.
Does he have host privileges?
Hang on. It may just be my Zoom.
there you go.
There we
There we
go.
go.
Okay. Y'all have to pardon me. We're more of a Teams outfit in Kentucky, so Zoom is a little slow for me. Okay. So I titled my talk today From Humble Beginnings because that's exactly where we've come from in Kentucky. Historically, Kentucky has ranked near the bottom of, well, many lists, but one of them has been definitely in the availability of resources to our self-represented litigant community. And we were fortunate a couple of years ago to, this was kind of right in the middle of the pandemic, but apparently there was some federal funding that was going out to the states, and our state legislature allotted some funds. It was not a big budget, but enough to try and get some things done. And they said, hey, what we would like to see is a self-represented litigant portal. They didn't really define what a self-represented litigant portal should be. They basically just identified areas that they thought we were underserving our litigants who were not able to, hire legal counsel for whatever reason. Most of the time, obviously, it's, their financial position. So I got a call from our implementation director, and she said, hey, guess what? I have a new project for you. You're now in charge of creating a self-represented litigant portal. And I said, okay, what's that? She said, I don't know. You have to figure that out. I said, oh, okay, that's a great start. That leaves it wide open. And that actually turned out to be a bit of a blessing. A lot of people had different ideas about what they thought self-represented litigant portal should be. And I think a lot of them thought, well, this is just, we're going to open up e-filing to, electronic filing to our self-represented litigants. Well, when we started looking into the roadblocks to opening that up to our self-represented litigants, we found over 140 statutes in Kentucky that deal with verification, things like having documents notarized, or the clerk has to witness signatures. So all of these kind of required them to reduce this to paper, go find somebody to do the verification, And then if they wanted to e-file, come back, find a scanner, upload it, and then get to the e-filing system. So it just seemed terribly impractical without some major legislative changes, which we have been working on and talking to our legislator about ways we can get around that. But what we, I started just kind of looking to see what other states were doing in different areas of self-represented, litigant services and resources. We basically kind of put a project together. I was in the beginning, I was the project manager, and that was it. That was the whole project team. We started looking for justice partners and other stakeholders that we could partner with. And this has been one of the things that I want to say has been key to the success of this project, which is getting a good invested group of stakeholders around the table. The main partner that we have worked with is our Kentucky Access to Justice Commission. That is chaired by Justice Michelle Keller, and the staff there is small. They're mostly grant funded, but with the resources we were able to bring to the table, we basically established a partnership with the Access to Justice Commission and allowed them to help us identify areas of need and tell us some of the things that they were seeing and that they were hearing from the self-represented litigant community as to areas we could focus on. A couple of the initial priorities that we identified was apparently there was a tremendous need in Kentucky for people who were stuck in basically what I call paper marriages, hadn't lived together in years or decades. Some of them weren't in a position to be able to obtain legal counsel on their own. So we thought, okay, let's look at providing some resources for people who need to get a paper divorce, basically. It was kind of low-hanging fruit. It's for completely, uncontested, no children under the age of 18. And the AOC already had a set of pilot forms that they'd been trying to get established for almost a decade. The other area of need that we identified, and I think this one was a no-brainer, was domestic violence. Obviously, there's a tremendous need for resources for victims of domestic violence, even just getting the paperwork filled out, right? And unfortunately, in Kentucky, our petition for domestic violence is a rather complex form. It's got tons of information in it that they may or may not have. So anyway, we identified those initial needs. And so I started looking around to see, okay, what are other states doing about these things? I think one of our legal aid society attorneys that I used to work with at the Court of Appeals years ago pointed me to, I think it was Michigan. And so I went in and I said, okay, how do I fill out a petition for domestic violence in Michigan? And all of a sudden I landed on an A2J.org guided interview. And I thought, hey, this is pretty cool. I went through the entire petition, filled it out. I even got up to the point where they asked me if I wanted to e-file it. And I said, no, I probably ought not to do that. But it was really neat to see the end user experience that A2J provided. And the ability to provide additional resources and information within that guided interview. And so I thought, wow, this is fantastic. So I immediately went to the CALI website and started researching A2J, found the author guide, realized that this was an open source product that it didn't cost us anything to use, which I have to say was one of the things that we were really appreciative of and have been to date. So started learning how to do the authoring portion of it. And after the several months after the spring, so it was July when our fiscal year kicks in, that we actually got the funding for the project, and we were able to hire a couple of additional resources. We hired a couple of business analysts, and we hired 2 quality assurance folks to help us test. Our business analysts and myself, with tremendous amount of help from the folks at CALI, Jessica and Tobias especially. They have been a constant resource for us. the author guide, the sample exercises that were provided, the monthly webinars, and the YouTube videos. Those we really are self-taught here. Other than the help, when we got ourselves painted into a corner, we would say, "Jessica, help." And they were always, right there for us. So you can't thank them enough for helping us learn how to utilize this tool. The very first guided interview that we put together was a small claims complaint. I know that sounds very basic, and that's why we picked it. It's a one-page form, super easy. We learned how to do that. And then we decided, hey, let's take all of this vast knowledge we now have and go after the petition for domestic violence protection. And at that time, I was working with a working group in Louisville, which is Jefferson County, our largest county in Kentucky. And this entire working group, which involved the county attorney and the circuit clerk's office and the Legal Aid Society, their entire goal was to just have a typewritten domestic violence petition. That was it. And after discovering, A2J.org and working on the petition for domestic violence, I kind of inserted myself into that working group and said, hey, I might have a solution for you here. So over the next several months, we were able to get our petition for domestic violence protection completed. And then we handed access to that over to the Legal Aid Society there in Louisville and the Domestic Violence Intake Center at the courthouse. And they just thought it was a fantastic thing. And they were able to provide, great feedback to us from their end users to help us kind of tweak and make that better. So, so all of that kind of was transpiring during the summer and fall of 2021. We did decide to host our guided interviews straight on A2J.org. There was tremendous resources there that we felt, we had backup, from the support folks there. And it just seemed the simplest decision as opposed to trying to host something ourselves. And that's turned out to be a great decision. We've had, no issues whatsoever with hosting our guided interviews there. We had an initial stakeholder meeting. Those started in November of 2021. Identifying the stakeholders was key here because each one of their perspectives has led us down different roads. I call this project my multi-headed hydra, because what started out as let's do a self-help portal, which nobody really knew what that was, has spawned multiple initiatives, much of it utilizing A2J. The Access to Justice Commission we worked with they had an initiative they were working on, and where they wanted to start what's what we call a legal help center. So the idea was you recruit volunteer attorneys, other legal professionals, law students. We did this in Lexington, Kentucky, where University of Kentucky Law School is. So we had great access to the law students over there. We even had a couple of professors that would come and volunteer with us. And we found that it was, so the Legal Help Center is staffed by volunteers, open to the general public currently, and even back then, it's been open for a little over a year now.
Next slide.
Thank you, Annie. See, that's Annie's my right hand here. She always reminds me to do what I forgot to do. So, yeah, we got through the design, development, and testing. And then with the opening of the Legal Help Center approaching in March, we thought this would be a great place to kind of pilot our guided interviews to use as a proving ground in a place where there's going to be, lawyers and legal professionals, law students, on staff in case we have problems or questions that we didn't answer through our interview. Also got to talking with a couple of the law professors that volunteered with us, and they were saying, hey, we've got some projects that our law students, have to do every semester, and we kind of let them define, what those projects are, or, run it by us first. Do you have any ideas, any thoughts where, our law students might be able to do something in association with the Legal Help Center as part of their semester project? And one of the things that we learned through writing the interviews on A2J was it really, really teaches you to get in the head of the person you're trying to get the information from. Oftentimes, when we're in these situations, we're working with folks who, here in Kentucky, a lot of them have a very limited education. They have limited communication skills. Some of them don't type very well. So it was a great exercise for us to work on our communication skills. Pardon me, I'm sorry. And we thought, what a great exercise that would be for the law students, right? So we actually got with those professors and established some project parameters, had the law students, pulled them into some meetings and said, hey, we've got a great idea. Why don't you all work on creating your own guided interviews? Because that will definitely help teach you how to communicate with the folks you're trying to get the information you desperately need from. So, those law students dove right in. We helped kind of teach them. We made all of the training resources available, and they took it and ran with it. So we didn't check to see what grades anybody got, but with the work that we saw that they did, we were very pleased with it. And we also thought this would be a great way to kind of help sustain our efforts. One day the money for this project, and we're going to spend it all, and the project itself will have to be closed, but we don't want the effort to be shut down at that point. We want this to live on past just the life of this one little IT project. And so, hang on. Pop-up notifications, they're like squirrels, you all. So anyway, we thought, the law students would be great because there's always going to be law students around. And if we can kind of make it an ongoing effort with law students to where they can help us keep these interviews updated and working for the public, we thought that would be a great use of their time and efforts as well. Just to give a few statistics to date, and our activity through April of 2023, you'll see the guided interviews we have here on the left. We've actually just launched a self-help portal as well. If I have time, I'll show you this at the very end. But these are our statistical breakdowns, and this is another great thing that CALI provides is, number of times the website in each interview has been visited. So we're able to kind of see what kind of activity is out there. So today we've had, you can see, over 2,600 visits to our guided interviews, which is fantastic. That's thousands of people being helped by this. And we're starting to see these, with the launch of the self-help portal, we're starting to see this work product show up in clerks' offices across the Commonwealth. It's not just in Lexington where we, started the Legal Help Center. So we've been able to broaden our horizons and expand the resources we've been able to provide to people. And I can't tell you how much success we have seen utilizing this tool. And quite frankly, how many hugs we've gotten at the Legal Help Center from people who came in and said, just thank you so much for putting this together, because I'm now free to move on with the rest of my life. So show you just a couple of quick pictures. And the title of this was From Humble Beginnings. And so this was our very first day in the Legal Help Center. We had one laptop. We had one printer and some borrowed space in the local law library. This is myself, Glenda, and Nan from the Access to Justice Commission, and our very first patron ever who came through. He is now happily divorced and moving on with his life, I'm happy to report. And then just one other picture from our 1-year anniversary. This was just this past March. We have gotten so fancy as to, we now have a sign. So we thought that was we thought that was a good step up for us, and we actually have a couple of dedicated workstations now, other than just the one laptop. So we have expanded, and with that, I'm going to take one extra minute. I know my time is almost up, but I would like to just quickly, if I can navigate. I want to. Let me know. Let me pull this up. So we launched a website in coordination with the guided interviews that we've built. This is our Kentucky Court of Justice self-help portal. And as you can see, top billing gets our A2J.org guided interviews. Anybody can access this from anywhere in the Commonwealth. We're also providing public workstations in courthouse lobbies to where people have like a kiosk type workstation that basically lands on this page. They can go in, they can do any of the guided interviews from the click of a button, proceed on, produce their forms, print them out right there, walk them over to the clerk. So it's just been a tremendous tool for us. It's enabled us to reach out to so many different stakeholders. You know, our Division of Libraries and Archives has been participating in this, so we can provide resources at public libraries. We're getting more and more interest from the law schools as to what they can do to help here. And even the Bar Association, who we thought was going to hate our guts because they thought we were stealing all their clients, has been tremendously supportive. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. From humble beginnings and with a small budget, we've been able to do a lot. And we do have CALI to thank for a lot of it. So I wanted to give them a shout out and say thank you to them. So thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Scott. So we will turn it over now to share the screen. Should I move that over to the over here? So you're ready. Okay, you're over here.
Sounds good, thank you. Hi, everybody. How we doing? Are we awake? After all the yes, cold. I know. I was starting to kind of shiver. The getting my feet wet is starting to catch up with me. But hopefully, we'll be filled with the fire of information. So welcome. My name is Carissa Vogel. I have the privilege of being the director of the University of Iowa's Law Library. And in that role, since we are the flagship university of the state, when our state library had some money to spend on building an Access to Justice website, they didn't have necessarily the expertise or the staffing to do it, and they called the university librarian, and the university librarian said, "That's law, call Carissa." So that's how I got involved in the Access to Justice missions, and I'm now a commissioner on the Access to Justice Commission for the state of Iowa. So it's been some really exciting times. So my presentation is talking about enhancing access to justice websites using ChatGPT, and this is a theoretical thing. So I'm really going to talk about the research that we tried to conceive of, the questions we were trying to answer by doing some work and just seeing what we could figure out. So I'm just going to, as a good law professor, I'm just going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you the things, and then we'll review. So I'm going to go over just kind of introduction, what we were trying to figure out. I'm going to spend the majority of my time talking about our actual research methodology, and I also would love to get questions and feedback from all of you specifically about that, because we're going to keep doing research on this. I'll briefly talk about findings and then some of our initial takeaways and kind of what we're thinking about for next steps. So this is the People's Law Library of Iowa. I am ridiculously proud of it. We launched it at the end of September last year after about 9 months of work. And this was the efforts. I think I really taxed some of my staff. Since the state library didn't have the resources, I said, well, we have a whole bunch of people here that can help. So we had some research assistants as well as some of our law librarians actually working on developing the content. And then we had volunteer attorneys and people in the Access to Justice Commission checking the information before we rolled it out. The state library was very happy with our work and built the maintenance and further development of this site into their 5-year strategic plan. So this is now funded through the next 5 years, which is really great. So it comes to me then to say, well, we have all kinds of ideas about what we could do with this. The first base level is we have to create text content for these pages, but we want to go above and beyond, right? We want to think about the different ways people access information, the different ways they learn, the information that we receive from the Access to Justice Commission and others in the clerks of courts and our public libraries to see where there are pain points, talking to nonprofits, to also see what the providers are finding, and then hopefully also talking to people themselves and what their needs are. So we don't want to come just as a place of expertise and saying, this is what we think you need to know based on some information. We actually want to get out into the communities and be talking to the people and showing the resource and saying, what about this works for you? What doesn't? What would you like to see? Here are some other state resources. What works on those? What doesn't? So the person that I hired to coordinate this website, the People's Law Library of Iowa, the first part of her title is Community Engagement Specialist, and then the People's Law Library Coordinator. So when we were thinking about how we go and build up this content, we want to free up as much of her expert time as we possibly can. So when we started seeing things about these large language models, we thought, well, is there a way that we can leverage this to free up some time to do rough drafts of content pages that then can be further refined, and then we can free up other people's time. We're also hoping to be able to make this something that can be replicated with other states. From my work on the Access to Justice Commission and our communications for commissions and judicial branches around the United States, we hear that people want these kinds of basic, easy to understand kind of initial summaries of law and then pointing to other resources, but just the idea of trying to get a website up is a hard enough hurdle, and then trying to populate it with content is then just hard to imagine, much less maintaining it. So what we were trying to solve for is there a way that we can utilize these large language models to do first drafts of content? What types of queries will yield the best results? So ones that reference librarians come up with, or ones that look more like what people might ask in a Google search, or what users ask when they're first initially encountering the library. When we thought about doing this, we thought, well, we wonder if the answers will change over time or based on the user who's asking the information, because we're starting off and just want to learn this a little bit. And then what might we learn from the styles of the answers or the things that we are getting back that will actually have us conceive of different ways to answer questions or queries. So those were the first kind of things that we were thinking through as we were designing how do we even start to think about this this resource. So our research methodology was we first talked about the fact that we had to deliver 3 new full content areas by the end of this September. And we were having a hard time finding someone to fill our People's Law Library Coordinator position, and we're running out of time just basically to do the content. So we thought, well, we could actually start to try to do this with some of our new content and see what happens. And as we were talking through that, I stopped and I said, well, we actually need, so we have to think about this as research methodology, we need a control. So so what I decided was that our control was going to be the content that we had already created in family law. And we weren't going to ask questions about every single area. We were going to identify levels of complexity across 3 different kind of topic places. So thinking about, we're going to stay in the family law because there's a lot of information out there in the universe, which we knew because we had built out that content and used resources that were out there around the state. And then we said, well, what is the most basic thing that's in that family law page? Well, how to change a child's name is probably the most basic. The paternity issues, we identified that as a kind of middle level of complexity, to the adoption processes being kind of the most extreme. And then we looked at some of the question bases that we had gotten through reference, and that also the state library had received, and then we started conceiving of different ways that we could potentially ask questions to see if there would be different responses back based on the kinds of questions we were asking. We had we had first identified 3 different people that were going to be creating the accounts and running the queries through ChatGPT. We wanted to do that once a week so that this was as the end of the semester is coming, so we had kind of a month to look at that information and then see if when we were running those queries, how it was different per user and how it kind of changed over time. So we were trying to conceive of all of the different potential ways that we could think to hold some things as constant and actually test out some other bits of information. We are probably a little bit overambitious in the kinds of things we were trying to test for, but we also thought we're wanting to do some of this while we still have research assistants to be running some of these things. We'll then do the analysis over the summer and then restart some of our research work then in the fall. So here's some of our brief findings. And you're not supposed to read this. This says, that's like the first test. Like how good is our reading, which is like me now at 45. That's like, I don't know, I can't read 8-point font. This is mainly to show the comparison of the control page, which is the website on changing a child's name in Iowa, and then what one of the chatbots came back for the first set of questions that we asked, and we have found by doing some analysis that on average 24% of the documents were different. So the arrows show the only places where there's actually overlap in phrasing or language that's has some kind of context related to it. We're going to refine a little bit how we're doing the analysis of the content as well, but we just needed a first kind of group to look at. We're also looking at is the content materially different, or how is it presented that's different? So we also, and I forgot to mention, we also had in the methodology had defined a reading level of 5th grade, because that is what the rest of our website is, work through 5th grade reading level. We received feedback that was really important, because a lot of times we have middle school and high school students who are helping their family members understand the information that is being presented to them. So we felt that we had to try to make it as basic and understandable as possible. So then we also tried to get the responses back to be at that same level, so that we had something again, as a control to kind of test the variables. We found that over time, the answers that we got back were increasingly looking like legal advice and changing words like may or could to should and must, which is just a strange thing to be thinking about. We were talking about that maybe the chatbot was getting annoyed that we were asking the same questions over and over, and they're like, just do it, just do what we're telling you to do, for the love of, yeah. So that was that specifically. So these are the results based on who I've identified as researcher 1. I still don't have all the results from researchers 2 and 3 because law students went off to the spring and kept promising they were getting things back. So I only have researcher 1 to look at for that. We also noted that the language over time became increasingly more complex and the answers became longer. Again, not sure why that's happening, but that's what we found. So when we analyzed the information, we found that the first results, the first kind of queries were actually the ones that we liked the best, which was probably the exact opposite of what we thought we would discover over time. So some of our takeaways, we have so many. Like with a lot of research, it just brings up more questions and more avenues to explore. So things that we're thinking about are what further instruction should be given when we're trying to say what we need to get back. We've also been thinking a lot about, this is a large language models, this is a broad set. If we could, as many people have been talking about, trying to narrow the scope of information. So if we could only be searching the Iowa Code, the judicial branch's website, all of those things, how would that change the quality of the answers that we were getting? The phrasing, obviously, of the queries matter. We got better results when something looked more like what a reference librarian would ask than more like one of our user questions would ask. In talking to Chantel Smith, who is our community engagement specialist and People's Law Library coordinator, she felt that in further refining some of these, that it would be useful to work on as a rough draft and a way to think about those. But obviously, expert review would be needed, and she felt that some of her work would be doing initial work and research so she had an idea of what she should be seeing, and then be able to refine further what it is that was being presented on the site, and as we add in citations. Oh, we also didn't ask for it to provide citations because we thought that was just another level of complexity that we didn't want to add into the whole mix of all the things that we were doing. We also came to the conclusion that this might save time in the end. It would take much more kind of initial work in crafting the queries and thinking very carefully about the instructions, but that pre-thinking about what we needed to present would be really useful. We also thought that this could be a good place to actually use law students. As many of the presentations talked about, David's was one of them, having people think about what it is that they need to find first. So they're coming in with a certain level of having to do some research, having to understand something, and then going about working as a way to actually help law students think more carefully about how to use the tools in their new ever-growing toolkit. We're also, it might be a time saver over time, but as we think about trying to document this in a way that others could replicate over time, that will also add to our complexity. So are there other ways that we can think about how we're using staffing or time or others that might have an interest in this to help build out the resource. So we're hoping that this can be a great thing over time to try to enhance what we're doing, but we're going to keep looking in the research and keep refining the kinds of things that we're looking at, and hopefully we can be working with different groups around the United States, from the National Organization of State Courts to access justice commissions, so that we can bring something like this to many, many more people. So, thank you.
I'll put Scott and Annie back on the screen. How do we bring them?
You need to get out of the slideshow.
Oh, sorry about that.
Stop sharing this screen.
Nope.
Nope, yeah, I got it.
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
So, questions?
Yeah, so Scott, Annie, we'll take questions from the room. If you have trouble hearing it, just let me know and I'll repeat it. So,
Sure.
questions. David.
I had a question for your workflow. Were you working right in the ChatGPT client? And what did that workflow look like for where you were?
Good question. The workflows I was talking about was like basically just in a Word document, kind of going through like what our methodology was and just making sure that that was accurate and up to date. We didn't do any kind of follow-up questions after the initial queries, because we thought that might change and add things over time, but that's absolutely something we're going to be thinking about as we refine.
So I was just curious, as it was now when you were constructing it, it was just you would go to the ChatGPT, you would enter a query, and then you, as you mentioned, like it get more complex as it went on. It would be you'd have a continued conversation.
Yes. I'm sorry. Yes, there would be a continued conversation going on
Other questions?
in each of the
Topic area. So you make a new chat for each topic area.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Have you have you found other organizations that are doing similar kinds of vetting of AI responses? Have you kind of collaborated with anybody? Because it's such an interesting, this is an important way to get the next step of how can we rely on this information. So
I would love to find others to do collaborations, because like we were just kind of one quick brain in a room at the middle of April going, hey, we've got this stuff to do, and now let's figure out if there's a quick and dirty solution, right? But now it's clear that we've got to try to figure out others that might be doing this so we can help. We can help each other. There's a computer science professor who is a really interesting colleague who has a joint appointment at the law school, so he's on my list of brains to people to be interested in.
Marjorie?
For the folks in Kentucky, what success have you had in getting useful output from law students in deriving interviews?
So that part of the project is still kind of in its infancy. We did work with several law students at University of Kentucky, and I believe that was fall semester of last year. And recently we had a meeting with two of our law schools more in Western Kentucky about possibly bringing them into the fold. So that part is still kind of, again, in its infancy and still growing.
When we've worked with law students in the past on other A2J Author courses, you get about 75% of a guided interview completed in a 14-week semester. So like you mentioned, some of the students just disappear at the end of the semester. They forget to turn in their final, files. Things get through to the presentation stage, but they're not actually tested all the way through to production. Right. So we always have partners, the court partner, the legal aid partner, sort of take ownership of the project after the student turns it over, with the understanding that they're getting most of the way there, but you still have to own it, you still have to test it.
Right.
Yeah, so we see about 75%.
Oh.
What do those partners find in terms of, are they able to just pick it up and go, or do they have to review stuff that is already theoretically accomplished?
Yeah, so they have to review it. Most of the time it gets all the way through. The student will have a guided interview and a template that, produces a document, but maybe there's a path along the way. If you say yes to a branch instead of no, like the student tested and there's dead answers. student projects are running live. Ones I did at Chicago Kent are on Illinois Legal Aid Online's website. I mean, they do produce it. It depends on the partner. So if the partner is like Scott and Annie and have experience in the software, they take it up, they run it, they test it themselves, and they finish it. If it's a partner who has never touched the software before, they have to go through that learning curve. So that's part of the beginning of the semester when we help facilitate projects with law schools. There's sort of this expectation setting that you have to be available to answer subject matter answer questions. It's going to be at the end of the semester. It's likely going to be an email at 2 a.m. with the student saying, oh my God, this is due tomorrow and I need to finish this. Same thing, they come to me with those questions and I have to do a lot of like, I'm available during normal business hours. Don't email me Sunday night at 10 o'clock. I'm not going to answer it. Like, sorry. So yeah, there's expectation setting when you start with partners. David.
In that interaction with students, how do you usually structure that? Are they doing like an independent study, or are they doing an internship? I mean, I assume they're getting credits. What's the vehicle you're using for that?
So the initial model when I was at Chicago Kent was a 14-week 4-credit course. And we did, the beginning of the semester, there was 20 to 25 hours of having to be in the courthouse observing self-represented litigants or helping at a self-help center like Kentucky had. So there was one at the courthouse in Chicago. And then we would go sort of through the larger access to justice crisis, the larger how does technology fit into that. And then the last half of the semester was learning the software, doing it, and it was the last like 4 weeks of school. But we've done it as a 1 to 2 credit fellowship, an externship. Students start their project and they actually want to finish it, so they do a 1 credit sort of next semester thing. It's a kind of a wide variety.
Can I ask a question? So you talked about like working with law students a little bit. On our end, we're actually talking about doing a class with some of the clinicians on access to justice, and instead of having it be like a final paper or exam, like figuring out early on, do you want to work with the court navigators program? Do you want to work with, like, we have like issues with forms too, like you could go over things and helping people like fill out forms or making videos about filling out forms or other things. Are those some of the conversations that you're having in Kentucky as well?
Yes, those are some of the conversations we're having in Kentucky. Again, this part of our project is something that we have just kind of dipped our toe into at this point, and we're hoping to expand it. I'm actually quite interested in maybe talking to some of the folks at this conference, because I'm already learning things that we hadn't thought of yet. So that'll be very helpful. But yeah, the students that we did work with, it was a project that they had to do in the context of a credited class that they were getting. So
yeah, and in the courses I've helped teach, there were the students got to decide. They could either pick a project that we had pre-facilitated with a legal aid or a court, or we said, think about your world in which you live. Where could form filling technology help that? There were some that volunteered, like at the senior center, that would be like, it was really great if we could do this, and they worked on that project. So we didn't always force a project on them. Come up with it. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you to our presenters for coming, and thank you all for attending. All right, thank you, Scott and Annie. I'll talk to you all later.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I feel like we should